What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about Chapter 6, Anatomy and Physiology. We'll talk about locating body organs and structures and talk about different body systems and their functions. So when it comes to locating body organs and structures, we can visualize things or we can go based off of topography. So visualizing something, I would be able to see that somebody's bleeding on their arm or on their chest. We can see those things. Going off topography, we have things like, our liver's located in our right upper quadrant. So when we're palpating, we feel that that's swollen or whatever. We can base that off of topography versus just visualization. So we'll get into body systems. So the musculoskeletal system has three main functions. It gives the body its shape, protects vital internal organs, and provides for body movement. The skeleton consists of the skull, spine, ribs, sternum, the shoulders and upper extremities, and the pelvis and lower extremities. So our skull, bony structure of the head, its function is to enclose and protect the brain. So the cranium is the vault that holds that brain, has a top, back, and sides. Then the face, the front of the skull, is made up of several smaller bones. So the cranium connects to facial bones. So we have our mandible, maxilla, nasal bones, orbits, and zygomatic arches. Here's a picture giving that example. So you can see the cranium is made up of a few different bones: the frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone, occipital bone, and the sphenoid bone. And then you can see the smaller structures like the nasal bones, orbit, maxilla, mandible, and the zygomatic bone there on that side. The spinal column consists of 33 vertebrae that encase the spinal cord. Our spinal cord is essential for movement, sensation, and other vital functions. The thorax, that is 12 ribs in our sternum. That protects the heart, lungs, and several major blood vessels that go through our thorax. Here's a picture demonstrating the spinal column here. So we have 7 cervical vertebrae, C1 through C7. C1 and C2 have their own names. So C1 is the atlas and C2 is the axis. Thoracic vertebrae, we have 12, so T1 through T12. And then our lumbar is 5, L1 through L5. And then our sacrum and coccyx. So the pelvis is also made up of several bones: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. And then our hip joint, what we call the acetabulum, that is the ball at the proximal end of the femur, so the end that connects to the pelvis. And in class, I'll show you guys a better picture of that. So our lower extremities consist of the femur, the large single bone in the upper part of your leg and your thigh, your patella, your kneecap. You have your tibia and fibula in the lower part of your leg, and then your ankle. Your foot has metatarsals, your calcaneus bone or your heel, and then phalanges, which are the toe bones. All right, moving on to our upper extremities, we have our clavicles, one on either side over kind of the first and second ribs. Our scapula, the kind of blade-shaped bone behind our shoulder on our back. Our acromion process, there's the acromioclavicular joint there. Our humerus, that's the single bone in the upper part of our arm, and then our radius and ulna in the lower part of our arm. Our wrist is made up of the carpals, and then our hand, the metacarpals, and then phalanges, again, are our finger bones. So our joints, we have a couple different types of joints in our body. A joint is formed when two bones connect to other bones. The two types of joints are a ball and socket. So that's something like our shoulder or our hip where we can have a little more movement. And then we have a hinge joint, something like our elbow or our knee where it's supposed to only been in that fashion. We have muscles in our body, different kinds of muscles. So voluntary muscles, things like skeletal muscle, we have the ability to send signals to our muscles and move them voluntarily. We have our involuntary muscle, also called smooth muscle. These are things like the muscles that encase your vessels in your body. Your brain has control over if those things are going to dilate or constrict. It's not something we choose to do. And we have our cardiac muscle, obviously only found in the heart. That muscle tissue is capable of something called automaticity. That's the heart's ability to generate and conduct its own electrical impulses. So again, here are the three different kinds of muscle: our voluntary or skeletal muscle, our cardiac muscle, and then our smooth muscle or involuntary muscle. Respiratory system. So our respiratory system brings in oxygen via inhalation and then excretes carbon dioxide via exhalation. So our air enters our body through our nose and our mouth. It moves through our oropharynx and nasopharynx. When we talk about those things, they are two separate things, but the pharynx includes both areas. As we inhale and exhale, air moves towards our lungs and out of our body. Our epiglottis, so that is a small flap of skin kind of toward the base of the tongue that closes over the glottis or the glottic opening if we go to swallow something so that nothing gets in through our trachea. Beneath the epiglottis, we have the larynx. So that's where our voice box is. It has our vocal cords, and there's some cricoid cartilage that forms over the lower portion, gives that box some protection. And then we enter the trachea. So through the trachea, we have our lungs. There will be a picture here in a minute. So our lungs contain bronchi and alveoli. Then the diaphragm is a muscle toward the bottom of our rib cage that is a key player in the respiratory anatomy. So inhalation, this is an active process where our diaphragm and intercostal muscles, the muscles between our ribs, contract, and that diaphragm moves downward, and the ribs move upward and outward, and that creates negative pressure that pulls air into our lungs. So remember, inhalation is an active process. Exhalation is a passive process. That's just where our diaphragm and intercostal muscles are relaxing, and then that positive pressure pushes air out of our lungs. So talking more about respiratory physiology, ventilation, that is the movement of gases to and from the alveoli. That is us breathing in and out, is ventilation. Respiration is actually the exchange of gases that's happening between the cells in the bloodstream at the cellular level. So our oxygenated blood is carried from our lungs to the heart, and then it's pumped to the rest of the body. At the cellular level, oxygen is exchanged with cells for carbon dioxide waste. The deoxygenated blood returns to the heart and then to the lungs, and then we breathe off that CO2, and then the next breath we're bringing in oxygen. Just an important note to make here. So a child has a smaller nose and mouth. The tongue takes up more space in the mouth of a child. The trachea is more narrow. The cricoid cartilage is less rigid and less developed. And then because of all those things, the airway structures are more easily obstructed. It's a little hard to tell here in this picture, but a child also has a larger head in proportion to an adult, particularly the back of their head. So you can see in the child in this picture lying flat like this, that his chin is a little closer to his chest. That's not helping the airway alignment. You can almost see the curvature of the trachea there and how that's kind of constricting that, versus in the adult that's lying flat or supine, the airway's alignment is a little better. So because of that, if we have to lie a pediatric patient supine, we want to consider putting some kind of padding underneath their shoulders to help that alignment a little bit better. Our cardiovascular system, so we have our heart, blood, and blood vessels. So anatomy of the heart, there are 4 chambers. We have 2 atria, that's the upper area, and then 2 ventricles in the lower area. So when we're talking about both atria, it is the atria. When we're talking about one, the right or the left atrium, we're calling it an atrium. So the pathway of blood through the heart is that it enters through the right atrium and then goes into the right ventricle, and then to the left atrium to the left ventricle. There's more than that we'll discuss in class, but that is where it goes just in the heart. I said we'd talk about it in class, but we're going to talk about it right now. So in this picture, this blue, let me see if I can pull my clicker up. This blue vessel right here that says from body, that is our vena cava. So we have our inferior and superior vena cava. So superior being that it's coming from the top part of the heart or above the heart, and then inferior coming from below the heart. That's what feeds blood to our heart through that right atrium. Once it goes through there, you'll see here the number 2, it's going through a valve called the tricuspid valve into the right atrium. From there, it's going to go up through the pulmonary artery. So it's an artery because it is bringing blood away from the heart, but the pulmonary artery is the one artery that we have in our body that's not carrying oxygenated blood. That is carrying blood to the lungs so that we can get the oxygen. Once it goes through the lungs and gets oxygenated, it comes back through the pulmonary vein. You can't really see that in this picture. It's back in behind here through into the left atrium. Then it goes from the left atrium through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle, and then it gets pumped from the left ventricle into the aorta, out to the body's arteries, arterioles, capillaries, and so forth. So we talked a little bit about the automaticity thing. So the cardiac conduction system. We have the cardiac tissue, the myocardium, that can generate its own electricity through these nodes. So we have our sinoatrial node. That is the pacemaker of the heart. So you'll hear people talk about sinus rhythm. That's because that rhythm is originating from the SA node. We have an intranodal pathway that brings it to the AV node through the AV bundle, the bundle of His, into the bundle branches and the Purkinje fibers. So every time our heart beats, it should be going from the SA node all the way down through the electrical conduction system here and creating the heart contraction that pumps blood through our body. So some important arteries to know. We have our coronary arteries. That's the blood that feeds our actual heart tissue. Our aorta. So that's what gets blood out of from our heart all the way into the other arteries of our body, with the exception of the pulmonary artery. So we talked about that. That is the one artery carrying the unoxygenated blood to the lungs, but it is an artery because it's carrying blood away from the heart. And we have our carotid artery and femoral artery. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. So here's some of our coronary arteries. So the first thing the heart feeds is itself. These arteries come off of the base of the aorta and feed the heart's muscle tissue. And then our other arteries, it's hard to see. Let me pull this clicker back up. So our aorta right here comes out of the heart, and almost immediately there are carotid arteries and subclavian arteries that start breathing. The carotid arteries bring blood into the head, and then our subclavian arteries go back into our body. We have our brachial artery on the inside of our arm, goes down, radial artery towards our wrist. So the aorta goes down. This is a very large vessel that goes down through our body, and right about at our hip level, it separates into the femoral arteries. That's called a bifurcation, where it goes from one vessel into two vessels. That bifurcates into the femoral arteries and then goes down into the legs, becomes the popliteal artery, the anterior tibial, the perennial, posterior tibial, and then the pedal and digital. And in class, we'll talk about how to assess pulses in some of those locations. So one thing this didn't talk about a whole lot so far is just how the gas exchange happens, the respiration happens at the cellular level in the tissues. So blood gets pumped out of our heart through the aorta, through all the arteries, and here you can see this is a very small artery. And then we have what's called an arteriole. That's just a little bit smaller. And then we have a capillary bed or a capillary net. This is where the blood vessels get very, very small and very, very thin. That allows oxygen to offload and CO2 to onload so that the body can take it and expel CO2. And then the body can accept the oxygen that's getting offloaded there in the tissues. The capillaries are very, very thin. They're only one cell wall thick. That's why that's how it's able to allow that diffusion to take place. And they're very narrow. It's only narrow enough for one red blood cell to get through at a time. Once it offloads oxygen and accepts waste products through the capillary bed, it goes back through a venule and then to the vein, where it goes back to the vena cava to make it back to the heart, to make it back to the lungs, so that the waste products can get expelled. All right, composition of blood. So we have plasma, that accounts for more than half of the volume of our blood. Red blood cells, so red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. White blood cells, there are several kinds of white blood cells. Again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in class. And then we have platelets. Platelets help with our clotting. All right. So our pulse. Pulse is just a pressure wave of blood flowing down an artery when the left ventricle contracts. So it can be felt by compressing an artery over a bone. Most commonly in adults, you'll see a radial pulse checked or a carotid pulse checked. Sometimes a femoral pulse. In smaller infants, we will most likely be assessing the brachial pulse. So we have a peripheral and central pulse that we can assess for. So peripheral pulses being radial, brachial, the posterior tibial, and the dorsalis pedis. If we have a good peripheral or distal pulse, that typically tells us that their blood pressure is pretty good and that they're not having too much vasoconstriction, because that happens in the outside parts of the body first. And then our central pulse toward the core of the body, that's femoral and carotid. Those are a little easier to find if the patient has a pulse, but their blood pressure is really, really low, or they're shunting blood to their core because they're in shock. So carotid and femoral pulses can be felt even when the peripheral pulses are too weak to be felt. So blood pressure. This is the force that blood exerts against the walls of the blood vessels. So we have our systolic number. That's the upper reading on our blood pressure. That is the arterial pressure when the left ventricle contracts. And then we have our diastolic pressure. That's the lower number on it. And that is the pressure when the left ventricle refills. These are also referred to as systole and diastole. So perfusion, this is an adequate supply of oxygen and nutrients to the cells of the body with the removal of waste products. Hypoperfusion or shock, that is when the perfusion becomes inadequate. We'll talk about shock in a little bit more detail, I believe, in the next chapter. So think about it. How is the function of the respiratory system related to the function of the circulatory system? The heart is pumping oxygenated blood to the body, and then the body does what it needs to do, gets waste products out back to the lungs so that we can expel it. So if there's any issue with either system, they're very closely related. When one is hurt, when one is not functioning properly, the other one cannot really function properly. So the interaction of the respiratory system and cardiovascular system is the cardiopulmonary system. So when we talk about CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. We've already talked about perfusion. The cells are oxygenated, carbon dioxide's removed. That's what we want. All right, we'll talk about the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system functions are to capture fluid and maintain balance of fluid. This is very important for our body's homeostasis. So some of our lymphoid organs, the adenoids, tonsils, spleen, thymus, and lymph nodes. Be careful, just try to avoid taking a blood pressure on the side of a woman's body where a mastectomy has been performed. Typically, the patient's very good about telling you that, no, you can't put a blood pressure cuff on that arm. If a woman has had double mastectomy, you can ask them, where has your doctor said it's okay for us to take a blood pressure on you? Like I said, they've gone through a lot and they understand a little more than the average patient when it comes to something like this. All right, our nervous system. So we have our central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and spinal cord. And then our peripheral nervous system has sensory nerves and motor nerves. And then our autonomic nervous system controls involuntary motor functions. Our digestive system, this provides the mechanisms by which food travels through the body and is digested. It consists of the stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. We do have some accessory organs like the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, and appendix that assist the digestive system in its job. All right, and we'll talk about the integumentary system. So our skin, it has a lot of functions some people don't think about. So protection, just protection from the environment, water balance. Without our skin in place, we would not be able to retain water in our body. Temperature regulation, sweating, having the goosebumps, all that. Excretion, again, kind of sweating, and then shock absorption, impact absorption. So our skin has different layers. So we have our epidermis, our dermis, and subcutaneous layers. You can see that in this photo here. So our first layer here, the epidermis, and then our dermis, where we have some sebaceous glands, the erector pili muscle, that's the muscle responsible for rising, causing our hair to rise from the goosebumps and everything, the hair follicle and everything down there. And then our subcutaneous layer, where we have, our sweat glands, nerves, veins, and arteries. So our endocrine system, this system produces hormones that regulate a lot of our body's activities and functions. Our pancreas is a large part of our endocrine system, and adrenal glands. So our pancreas is responsible for the role of insulin in our body, excreting insulin to control our glucose level, blood glucose level. And then our adrenal glands secrete epinephrine. Give you guys a chance to look at this picture here. Our renal system. So we have our urinary system. It helps our body regulate fluid levels, filter chemicals, and adjust our pH. When we talk about homeostasis, our pH is a very big part of that. The kidneys have a huge role in our body's homeostasis. So the kidneys are the principal organ in the renal system. And then we have our bladder. That is just the fluid reservoir for urine. So the kidneys are located, in this picture from the front, it looks like it's just in the abdomen with everything else. It's located in what's called the retroperitoneal space. So they're toward the back of the body. They're not up here in the front with a lot of the other organs. So we have ureters. Those are small tubes that transport urine from the kidneys to the bladder. And then the urethra is what brings it from the bladder outside of our body. So the reproductive system, we have the male reproductive system. The testes and the penis are male reproductive organs. And then the female reproductive system, we have ovaries, uterus, and the vagina. All right, we'll do a chapter review here. So as an EMT, your knowledge of the anatomy or structure and the functions or physiology of the body will be important in allowing you to assess your patient and communicate your findings accurately and efficiently to other EMS personnel and hospital staff. The major body systems which you should be familiar with are the musculoskeletal system, respiratory system, cardiovascular system, nervous system, and digestive system, as well as the integumentary system, endocrine, renal, and reproductive systems, both male and female. And I'm going to share some other video with you guys, not ones that I've done, but some other videos that I found very helpful in kind of learning more about anatomy and physiology. All right, so some things to remember. Cellular metabolism requires a constant supply of oxygen and glucose. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next chapter. But the absence of either one of those components disrupts our normal metabolism. The cardiopulmonary system combines the functions of the respiratory and cardiovascular systems to provide oxygen at the cellular level. So we talked about the cardiovascular and respiratory systems are very closely related, and it's really, really hard for them to function independently. They both count on each other. Shock. So again, we haven't talked about those. We haven't broken it down too much, but we will in the next chapter. Shock occurs when the cardiopulmonary system fails and the cells become hypoperfused. So going back to our medical terminology chapter, hypo is the term for low. So they are not getting perfusion. They're low perfusion. The body is composed primarily of water, and this fluid is distributed throughout the body systems. So it's very important for us to stay hydrated and not lose any of that fluid. So that is it for this chapter. Like I always suggest, if you have questions, write it down so that we can bring that to class. and we can talk about anything that you guys want to talk about in more depth in person. So thank you very much. We'll see you on the next one.